stood in the shareholder hall, the place I built with my own hands. My son Ethan stood at the head of the long oak table, looking at me with a cold, steady face I barely recognized. "Dad, you're relieved of all duties. Security will escort you out." People whispered. Some looked away. I walked out in silence, but inside something sharper than humiliation began to rise. Before I continue, thank you for being here. Please subscribe and let me know where you are listening from. Stay with me until the end, because this story goes much deeper than a son turning on his father. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Michael Hayes. I'm 60 years old, and for most of my life I believed I understood what it meant to build something with care. I built Hayes Technologies from a desk in my garage. I built a home with my wife Linda, and I tried, in every way I could, to build a future for my son Ethan. After that moment in the shareholder hall, after hearing my own child remove me from the company I created, I kept walking. I went straight to my car and sat there for a long time, breathing slowly, waiting for the sting to fade. But it did not fade. It settled inside me like a quiet weight. And as I sat there, the memories began to rise. Memories of how all of this began long before that meeting. So let me take you back. I grew up in a small neighborhood where no one had much money, and the only thing people shared freely was advice. My father used to tell me, if you ever build something, build it in a way that outlives you. Those words stayed with me. Hayes Technologies started as a tiny software idea, a hope more than a plan. I worked late nights, early mornings, and long weekends. Linda would bring me coffee, kiss my head, and tell me to rest. I rarely listened, and she rarely complained. Linda was the heart of our family. She was warm, patient, and gentle in a way that made the world feel steady. When Ethan was born, she became the soft bridge between me and the boy who would one day become my greatest pride and my deepest wound. Ethan grew up with everything I never had: a safe home, a good school, opportunities waiting at every corner. He was bright, curious, and full of ideas. But he always looked at me as if he was trying to measure himself against something he could not touch. He wanted to prove that he could stand on his own without my shadow over him. I never wanted him to feel that way. But ambition has a strange way of filling the spaces where love should be. As he grew older, Ethan became sharper, more driven. He graduated, came into the company, and rose fast. And I was proud of him, truly proud. But I also saw a certain hunger in him, a hunger for approval, for control, for recognition. I tried to guide him gently, slowly, hoping he would learn the difference between power and purpose. Then came Ava. She stepped into his life with calm confidence. She was observant, polite, and always carried a sense of quiet calculation. From the first moment I met her, I felt something I could not name. Linda would have known right away. She had a gift for sensing people. But Linda passed years ago, and without her I sometimes missed the things she would have seen. Ava always stood close to Ethan, listening, watching, whispering small thoughts into his ear. She made him feel stronger, more certain, and for a while I thought that was a blessing. My son had someone who believed in him, someone who pushed him, someone who made him feel like he could handle the future I had been preparing for him. So after more than 3 decades, after fighting through setbacks and struggles, after climbing to the top and nearly losing everything more than once, I decided it was time to step back. I wanted to give Ethan the chance to lead. I wanted him to feel trusted, to feel ready, to know I believed in him. I handed him the CEO title with a quiet heart and a hopeful mind. I told him, "This is yours now. I want you to grow it in your own way." He hugged me. He said he was grateful. He said he would make me proud. For a short while, life felt peaceful. I switched to an advisory role. I spent mornings walking near the lake, letting the cool wind touch my face the way Linda used to. I spent afternoons reviewing small reports, keeping a light hand on the company. The tension in my shoulders eased for the first time in years. But peace has a way of hiding cracks, and those cracks began to show sooner than I expected. It started with small things, tone distance, tiny shifts that I brushed aside. I told myself, he is adjusting, he is learning. I wanted to trust that everything was fine. I wanted to believe the path I opened for him would stay smooth. But the truth is, the storm had already begun. I just had not felt the wind yet, and the first sign came a week later, with a simple sentence that carried more weight than Ethan realized. Now, let me tell you about the moment I first saw my son changing. It happened quietly. almost too quietly. A week after Ethan became the new CEO, I noticed a shift in the air around him. It was small at first, almost invisible, the way a room feels different when someone walks out of it. Something in his voice changed, something in his eyes. He still greeted me, still spoke to me, but the warmth was thinner, lighter, as if he was saving it for someone else. I remember walking into a small meeting room one morning. It was a simple meeting, something we had done together countless times. A few department heads were waiting. Ethan was already at the table looking over a set of papers. When he lifted his eyes, there was a brief pause, a hesitation I had never seen before. We finished the meeting, and everyone filed out. I stayed behind, expecting him to share a thought, maybe ask for advice. Instead, he closed the folder slowly, as if choosing his words with care. "Dad, maybe you should stop coming to the office so much. It confuses people." The words were soft, but they hit me with surprising force. Not anger, not disrespect, just distance. A wall I did not see being built. I kept my voice steady. "Confuses them," how he shrugged. "They do not know who to listen to. You say one thing, I say another. It sends mixed signals." I nodded, even though I knew we had never given anyone mixed signals. Not once. "Is that how you feel?" I asked, "or is that what someone told you?" He did not answer right away. He glanced toward the door, then back at me. "I just think it would be better," he said quietly. For everyone, there was something rehearsed in the way he said it, something that did not belong to him. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I simply placed a hand on the back of a chair, steadying my breath. "All right," I said. "If that is what you want, I will give you space." He looked relieved. Relieved. That was when my chest tightened for the first time. Not because of the request, but because of the expression on his face, as if he had just completed something he had been told to do. When I left the room, I walked slowly down the hallway. I remembered the day he first walked into this building as a young intern. He had followed me closely, listening to every word, eager to learn. Now he walked these halls as if he needed to keep distance from me, as if I were a shadow he had been waiting to step out of. I told myself not to worry. I told myself he was adjusting, that new responsibility changes people. But deep down, something whispered a quiet warning. It was the first spark, the first small shift that hinted at something larger, something I could not yet see. I did not know it then, but it was the moment my son began to slip away from me, and the path ahead would only grow darker. The days that followed moved slowly, almost too slowly. After that small meeting, after hearing my own son ask me to step back, I tried to carry on as if nothing had changed. I tried to believe it was just a misunderstanding, a moment of pressure, a sign that he was adjusting to his new role. But truth has a way of rising, even when you do not want to face it. And in the weeks that followed, the truth began to show itself piece by piece. Not in loud moments, but in small cuts that gathered into something deeper. It began with whispers. I arrived at the office one morning a little later than usual. I was taking Ethan's words to heart, giving him more room, letting him breathe, letting myself breathe. I walked through the lobby, greeting a few people I had known for decades. Their smiles were polite, but distant, as if they did not know where I stood anymore. I ignored it at first, until I walked past two junior employees by the coffee machine, speaking in low voices. They did not see me. I heard he is too old school, slows everything down. "Yeah," Ethan said, "his dad can't keep up anymore." I froze, not because of the words, but because of the tone. Quiet, certain, as if it were common knowledge, as if it had been said more than once. I stepped away before they turned and saw me. My heart felt heavy, but I told myself to stay calm. I told myself this was nothing more than office talk. But the whispers continued, growing a little louder each day, and then they turned into actions. The second escalation came out of nowhere. I had always kept a personal office on the top floor. Not large, not decorated, just a simple space with a window, a shelf with a few of Linda's books, and the old wooden desk I kept from the early days of the company. That desk carried 30 years of my life. It held my hardest nights, my biggest decisions, and my quiet prayers. One afternoon I went upstairs to get a folder. The hallway was strangely quiet. When I reached my office, I stopped. The door was open. The lights were off. And inside, the room was empty. The desk was gone. The books were gone. Even the picture of Linda was missing. Only the bare floor remained, staring back at me like a stranger. A young employee walked by, holding a clipboard. He paused when he saw me. "Oh, Mr. Hayes, I didn't expect you. We cleared this room out this morning." I tried to steady my voice. "On whose order?" He shifted nervously. "Ethan said you approved it." I said nothing, because I knew I had never approved a thing. He walked away quickly as if afraid to linger. I stepped inside the empty room and stood in the silence. The walls seemed taller without the shelves. The air felt cold, and for the first time I felt erased. Not forgotten, erased. I closed the door gently and walked back down the hallway with slow steps, feeling as if the ground beneath me had tilted. Something was happening behind my back. Something calculated. Something designed to push me out without pushing me openly. And the question that sat in my mind was simple. Who was guiding my son? The answer began to show itself in small, quiet moments. Escalation number 3 came in the form of decisions. Sudden ones. Reckless ones. Ethan started approving new partnerships with people I had never met. Signing deals that made no strategic sense. Spending money where the company did not need to spend. Cutting budgets that needed stability. I watched from a distance, saying nothing, trying not to interfere. But inside, I felt the weight growing heavier. One morning, one of the oldest executives in the company, a man named Robert, walked into my small advisory office with a troubled face. I had known him since his first day. He had been loyal through every storm. "Michael," he said quietly, closing the door behind him, "I need to tell you something." He sat down slowly, lowering his voice even more. "Your son is not acting like himself. Someone is directing him." I looked at him, my chest tightening. "Who?" He shook his head. "I do not know. But he listens too closely to someone. Every major change, every questionable decision, starts after a private conversation. He shuts everyone out after that. He does not listen." I leaned back in my chair, feeling something sharp rise inside me. Robert sighed. "He still respects you. I can see that. But he is being guided, Michael, influenced. And whoever it is, they do not have the company's best interest in mind." I thought of Ava. Her quiet presence, her timing, her watchful eyes. I had no proof, but doubt was already sitting in the room with us. The 4th escalation came at home, late in the evening. Ethan visited me one night unannounced. He sat on the couch across from me, his hands clasped, his shoulders stiff. Something weighed on him, something heavy. After a long silence, he said, "Dad, the board thinks you should stay home." I looked at him steadily. "Stay home? For what reason?" He avoided my eye. "They think it is time for a full transition. They think your presence confuses the team." I let the silence settle for a moment. Then I asked softly, "Is that the board? Or is that you?" He hesitated, his jaw tightened, his eyes shifted to the side, and he did not answer. The room stayed quiet for a long time. I watched him stare at the floor, unable to look at me. And in that silence, something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a slow, painful shift, like a branch bending under too much weight. He left soon after, saying nothing more. When the door closed, I leaned back and closed my eyes, trying to catch my breath. The house felt too still without Linda. She would have known what to do. She would have touched my hand and said something calm, something wise. But she was gone, and I was alone with a truth I did not want to face. My son was slipping farther away, and someone else was holding the rope. And then came the breaking point, the moment that changed everything, the shareholder meeting. It was a bright morning, but the sky felt heavy. I walked into the hall out of habit, out of respect, out of hope that maybe I still belonged there. The long oak table was polished, the chairs arranged, the screens glowing with the company logo. People greeted me with uneasy smiles. Some avoided my eyes. Some whispered. Ethan stood at the head of the table wearing a perfectly fitted suit, his expression calm, too calm. Ava stood behind him slightly to the side, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder as she spoke softly into his ear. When the meeting began, I sat quietly listening. The presentations were short, the updates were rushed, and then Ethan cleared his throat and lifted a small folder. "I have an announcement," he said, his voice steady. Something in me tightened. He looked at me for a brief moment, then away. "As of today," he continued, "my father will be removed from all operational roles within Hayes Technologies." There was a gasp, a shuffle of papers. Someone whispered my name. Ethan kept going. "This is to ensure a clear transition, a modern approach, a new direction. Effective immediately, he will not participate in any internal activities. The words fell like stones. My chest felt hollow, not because he removed me, but because of how easily he said it. He closed the folder. Security will escort you out. For a moment the room went silent, completely still. I stood slowly, keeping my breath steady. I did not look at anyone. I did not speak. I walked toward the door as people lowered their eyes. And as I stepped outside, as the door closed behind me, something inside me shifted from pain to clarity. Someone had pushed my son into this. Someone had whispered in his ear long enough for him to believe this was the only way forward. I felt my hands steady, my steps slow, my breath ease. Because at that moment, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whoever wanted me out had just opened a door they should never have touched. And soon, they would learn what it meant to underestimate a man who built everything with his own hands. I left the shareholder hall with quiet steps, but the calm I showed on the outside was nothing like what I felt inside. There was no anger in me, no rush of emotions, just an empty kind of stillness, the kind that appears right before the truth begins to surface. That night I sat alone in my living room, the lights dim, the sound of the clock moving in slow, even beats. I kept replaying the moment Ethan looked at me and told security to escort me out. His voice had been steady, his expression controlled, but underneath, I had seen fear. Not fear of me, fear of something else. And when someone acts out of fear, it means someone is pulling strings behind them. I did not have to wait long for the truth to come. 3 days after the meeting, just as I was finishing a quiet breakfast, my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I found Mark standing there. He looked worn, tired, older than I remembered. Mark had served as my CFO for many years. He was sharp, loyal, and calm under pressure. He had been fired by Ethan not long after the transition. The explanation he received at the time had been vague. Restructuring, new vision, words that meant nothing. But seeing him at my door, I knew this was not a social visit. "Michael," he said softly. "Do you have a moment?" I nodded and stepped aside. He walked in slowly, holding a small black USB drive in his hand. When we sat down, he kept his eyes on it, turning it between his fingers. "I should have come sooner," he whispered, but I needed time to understand what I found. I stayed quiet, letting him speak at his own pace. When Ethan fired me, he said I still had access to a few internal folders. They weren't protected yet. I looked through them because something felt wrong, very wrong. He placed the USB on the table between us. "What's on that?" I asked quietly. He exhaled. "Documents, emails, conversations, things you need to see." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I reached for the USB and held it gently. "Tell me," I said, my voice steady. Mark looked at me with a sadness I had not seen in years. "It wasn't Ethan's idea to remove you," he said. "He was pushed. Hard." My chest tightened, though I tried not to show it. He continued. "There's an investor involved. You know him. Or at least, you know of him. Victor Hale." I closed my eyes briefly. When I heard the name, Victor was known for one thing, taking companies apart from the inside and reshaping them into something unrecognizable. Ruthless, strategic, cold. The kind of man who saw people as pieces on a board. I had denied him an investment in the company many years ago. I did not trust him, and now it seemed he had found another way in. Mark leaned forward. "The emails show that Victor has been contacting Ethan directly, guiding him, promising him things. What things, I asked, even though I already feared the answer. "Full control," Mark said. "Recognition, independence from you, a chance to prove himself. Victor told him that you were holding the company back, and that the only way forward was without you." A long silence settled between us. But that was not the worst part. Mark reached into his jacket and pulled out a single printed sheet. He handed it to me. At the top was the subject line, "Meeting arranged, final confirmation." And below that, I saw Ava's name, her email, her signature. She was the one who scheduled the first private dinner between Ethan and Victor. My hands stilled, my breath slowed. I read the final email at the bottom of the page. It was short, direct, and devastating. "Once your father is gone, we proceed with restructuring. He won't see it coming." For a moment, the room around me went quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that arrives when everything you believed in begins to shift. Ethan had not woken up one morning and decided to betray me. He had not stood in that hall because he wanted to. He stood there because someone had planted doubt in him slowly, steadily, until he could not tell his own thoughts apart from someone else's. He was not the mastermind. He was the pawn. And that truth hurt more deeply than the public humiliation. Mark placed a hand on the table. "I'm sorry, Michael. I thought you should know." I nodded slowly. "Thank you." He stood and left quietly, closing the door behind him. I sat there for a long time, the USB still resting in my hand. My heart did not burn with anger. It did not shake with betrayal. It simply felt heavy, like something precious had slipped from my grasp without me noticing. I looked out the window, watching the soft movement of the trees in the wind. I whispered to myself, they think I won't see it coming. But now, I had seen everything, and the next steps would change everything they thought they controlled. Ethan's voice kept echoing in my head, long after he slammed the conference room door behind him. "Dad, don't make this harder than it has to be." Harder, he had no idea what hard really was. He'd only tasted the surface of what ambition could cost a person. And yet, hearing him speak to me with that cold certainty left a sting I couldn't ignore. As I drove away from my office, I expected anger to rise again, but instead something quieter settled in, a strange, heavy calm. The kind that appears only when everything familiar has already collapsed, and all you have left is the truth you haven't spoken yet. That calm stayed with me as I stepped into my house that evening. The lights were off, the air still. Normally I'd hear Olivia in the kitchen or the soft hum of the television Ethan liked to leave on downstairs. But tonight silence greeted me first, the kind of silence that felt intentional. I walked into the living room and found him sitting there, Ethan leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like he was preparing for a confession he already regretted. He didn't look up when he said, "Dad, we need to talk." His voice was steady, but I could hear the tension inside it. The same tension I used to hear from him when he was a boy, trying to explain why he broke the neighbor's window. Guilt wrapped in bravery. But tonight, the stakes were far higher. I sat down across from him. "I'm listening," I said, keeping my tone as calm as I could. He took a slow breath. "I know today was a lot, and I know you're angry, but you need to understand there are things happening behind the scenes you don't know about. Things I didn't want to be part of, but I didn't have a choice." I watched him closely. His hands were shaking. Ethan was many things: ambitious, stubborn, sharp, but he was never a liar. Not to me. "What kind of things?" I asked. He pressed his palms together, rubbing them as if trying to warm himself. "Mom, Olivia, she's been planning something for years. I only realized the full scope recently." He swallowed hard. "She wants everything, Dad. The company, the house, the accounts. And she's smart. She's been creating a trail that makes you look unstable, irresponsible, a danger to the company." My pulse tightened, but I didn't interrupt him. I let him speak. "She said it was for our future," he whispered. "Mine and hers. But I realized it wasn't about protecting me. It was about controlling everything, and she used me, my position, my trust, to help her do it." He finally looked up at me, and in that moment I saw it, the conflict, the regret, the fear. "Dad, I messed up. I let her pull me in, and I don't know how to fix it." The calm inside me deepened. "Ethan, look at me," I said. He did, almost reluctantly. "You had a choice. Maybe not an easy one, but a choice. And you chose wrong. That's the truth." He didn't defend himself. Didn't deny it. His eyes dropped again, but I continued softly, "It's not too late to choose differently." He looked at me again, and his expression cracked. "Just slightly." "What do you mean?" I leaned back, letting my voice stay steady. "Your mother thinks she has the upper hand. She thinks today broke me. But she's forgetting something important. I built that company from nothing. I built this family from nothing. And I know every flaw in the foundation she thinks she owns." Ethan's breathing shifted. A flicker of hope, small but real, pushed through his guilt. "So what do we do?" he asked. "We start by telling the truth," I said. "All of it. You're going to walk me through every detail she's been hiding. Every document, every email, every meeting. And then we make our move." He hesitated. "Dad, she isn't going to just back down. You know that." "I know," I replied. "And I'm not asking her to." For the first time that night, Ethan's shoulders straightened. Not completely, just enough for me to see the son I knew was still inside him, the one who cared, the one who wanted to do what was right even if he'd lost himself along the way. We talked for hours after that. He explained how Olivia had slowly taken control, isolating me from key partners, shifting board loyalties, planting rumors about my judgment. It was a web crafted with patience and precision. And Ethan, in his desire to prove himself, had become her perfect tool. But the thing about tools, once they see the hand that wields them, everything changes. When the clock passed midnight, Ethan finally leaned back, exhausted. "Dad, I'm sorry," he murmured. "I know I answered, and I meant it, but apologies won't fix this. Actions will." He nodded slowly. "So what's the plan?" I stood looking at the shadows stretching across the floor. "Tomorrow," I said, "we start turning this story around. Not with anger, not with revenge, with something far more powerful." Ethan looked up, waiting. "The truth," I said. "And the timing to use it?" What he didn't know, not yet, was that I had already taken my first step long before he walked into the living room. Because while he spent months living in Olivia's shadow, I'd spent years preparing for the day she finally overplayed her hand. And tonight I saw it clearly she had. Now it was time for me to step out of the wreckage she tried to bury me in, and walk toward the reckoning she never saw coming. Ethan's confession settled over the room long after he went upstairs. The house felt different, lighter in some corners, heavier in others. I sat alone for a while, letting everything align in my mind. Olivia's plans, the board's reactions, the shifting alliances, and now Ethan's turning point. But the truth was, I had seen this storm coming long before today. Not because I doubted my family, but because life had taught me when you build something valuable, someone will always try to take it, sometimes even the people closest to you. Still, knowing something in theory and facing it in reality are two entirely different things. And now, everything was real. The next morning, Ethan came downstairs early. He looked tired, but clearer, more grounded than I'd seen him in months. "Dad," he said quietly, "I've pulled the files you mentioned. They're on my drive. We should go through them." I nodded. "We will, but not here." He frowned slightly. "Where then? A place where your mother never bothered to look," I said with a small knowing smile. He didn't understand yet, but he would. By noon, we were driving toward the old warehouse district, an area that belonged to the company back when it was just a small operation. Years ago, I'd converted one of the buildings into a private workspace, a place I used when I needed complete focus or quiet. No one on the board even remembered it existed. And Olivia, she had never cared enough to ask. When we stepped inside, the lights flickered on, revealing a room filled with old files, locked cabinets, and a single long table in the center. Ethan looked around in surprise. "You still kept all of this?" "I keep everything," I said, "especially the things I know I'll need when people start rewriting history." He swallowed understanding more deeply than before. We sat at the long table, and Ethan plugged in his drive. Slowly, methodically, we began reviewing the documents. Emails between Olivia and board members, financial transfers she'd disguised as corporate expenses, a timeline of how she had replaced long-term partners with her own contacts. It wasn't sloppy, but it wasn't flawless either. Ambition rarely is. Ethan pointed to one message in particular. "This one. This is where she convinced the board you were unstable. She told them you were hiding losses, that you were making irrational decisions because of stress." I leaned closer. "And did you believe her?" His voice dropped. "At the time, yes. I shouldn't have, but she sounded certain, and I thought—" He stopped, shaking his head. "I thought she wanted what was best for the company. She wanted control," I corrected gently. "And she used your trust as her leverage." He nodded slowly. We worked for hours. Piece by piece, the picture sharpened, not just of Olivia's scheme, but of the system she had built to ensure she would never be questioned. Yet in her confidence she had overlooked one thing: my silence wasn't inaction. It was observation. And now, with Ethan willing to help me, the truth had enough weight to break everything she'd constructed. As the afternoon sun slanted through the dusty window, Ethan suddenly froze. "Dad," he whispered, opening a folder he hadn't touched yet. "You need to see this." He slid the document toward me. It was a contract, one that transferred voting rights from my shares to Olivia under the condition that I was declared temporarily unfit to oversee operations. My signature was on it, except it wasn't. The handwriting was an imitation, a good one. But I knew my own signature better than anyone. Ethan's voice trembled. "She forged it. She actually, Dad, this could hold up in court if the board backs her." I looked at the signature quietly. "She didn't forge it herself." He stared. "What do you mean? Your mother's smart, but she's not reckless." She wouldn't leave herself exposed to a felony charge unless she trusted the person doing the job. Ethan's face paled as realization hit. Someone on the board, he exhaled shakily. Or someone in legal. Exactly. The room felt colder suddenly. But that clarity I'd found last night returned. Deep, steady, unwavering. Ethan pressed his hands against his forehead. Dad, I can't believe I helped her. I can't believe I let this get this far. I placed a hand on his arm. Ethan, listen to me. Today is not about guilt. Today is about truth, and you're choosing the right side now. He nodded, though his eyes were glassy. I stood and walked to one of the cabinets, unlocking it. Inside were files I had kept for years, records, backups, signed contracts, timestamps, old agreements, proof of my company's foundation, proof of my decisions, proof of my competence, a lifetime of evidence. I placed a thick folder on the table. This, I said quietly, is what she never expected me to still have. Ethan lifted it carefully, almost reverently. What is it? Everything she tried to erase. Every original contract. Every audited report. Every signature I ever made, confirmed and authenticated. All time-stamped, all notarized, all backed up. He opened the folder, scanning quickly. This could destroy her whole narrative. Yes, I said. And that's only part of it. He looked up. There's more, I nodded. She built her strategy on the assumption that I was unaware. But I wasn't. I just didn't want to believe that someone in my own home could be plotting this deeply. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. But there comes a moment when a man stops mourning what he thought his family was, and starts protecting what his family should have been. Ethan's expression tightened, not with guilt this time, but with resolve. So what's our next step? He asked. We prepare, I said, because by the time we walk into that boardroom again, we're not going in as victims. We're going in with facts. And when facts speak, lies collapse. He breathed in slowly. Dad, she's not going to take this quietly. No, I said with a faint smile. She won't. Olivia has spent too long believing she's untouchable. She's forgotten something important. What's that? I met his eyes. That the truth may be slow, but it's never weak. Ethan sat back, absorbing every word, and I could see the shift happening inside him. Doubt was fading. Clarity was taking its place. For the first time in months, he looked like my son again, not the man shaped by Olivia's ambitions, but the boy who once believed I could fix anything. And now, in a quiet warehouse, filled with old papers and new consequences, he finally understood that I wasn't the one who needed saving. We both did. And we were going to start by saving the truth. By the time we locked the warehouse and stepped back into the fading daylight, something in Ethan's posture had changed. The guilt was still there, but now it shared space with determination, a quiet strength, the kind that appears only when a person finally chooses a side and understands the weight of that choice. On the drive home, neither of us spoke much. The wind pressed against the car windows, the sky slowly dimming, as if the world outside understood the shift happening between us. When we pulled into the driveway, Ethan stayed seated for a moment, staring ahead. Dad, he said softly, what happens when Mom realizes I'm not helping her anymore? She will, I replied, and she won't like it, but she won't expect what comes next. He nodded, but I saw the worry in his eyes. Not fear of her, but fear of confrontation, fear born from years of being caught between two worlds he thought he had to choose from. Inside the house, the lights were on. Olivia was home. I felt Ethan tense beside me as we stepped into the foyer. She stood at the bottom of the staircase, arms crossed, gaze sharp enough to cut glass. Her smile was thin, practiced the kind she used when she wanted control without raising her voice. There you two are, she said calmly. I was starting to wonder. Ethan swallowed. We needed to go over some things. Oh, her eyes flicked to me then, back to him. Work things. Before he could answer, I stepped forward. Yes. Company matters. Things Ethan needed clarity on. Her gaze locked onto mine, a silent challenge. She wasn't used to hearing directness from me. Not lately. I could almost see the shift behind her eyes, calculating, measuring, adjusting. Well, she said with a slow exhale, I'm glad he's finally taking things seriously. The words were subtle, but the meaning wasn't. She was reminding Ethan of which side she expected him to stand on. For a moment he hesitated. Just a heartbeat. But then he surprised us both. I am, he said, but I'm doing it with Dad. Olivia's smile faltered barely, but enough for me to notice. With your father, she repeated, as if the idea itself were absurd. Yes, Ethan said, straighter than before. We're handling things together. The air tightened between the three of us. Olivia studied him with narrowed eyes, then shifted her gaze to me, her expression sharpening like a blade. "Well," she said, finally, "I hope the two of you know what you're doing." "We do," I replied, keeping my voice level, "and we're far from finished." For the first time that evening, she blinked. A break in her composure. A tell. Without another word, she turned and walked up the stairs, each step measured but stiff. The moment she disappeared around the corner, Ethan let out a breath he'd been holding. "She knows," he whispered. "Yes," I said, "and that's fine." He looked at me uncertainly. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," I said, "because now she'll move faster. She'll expose her next steps, and when people rush, they make mistakes." We walked into the living room, the house quieter than before. Ethan sank onto the couch, running a hand through his hair. "Dad, she's not stupid. She's going to fight." "She will," I said, "but she's fighting the wrong battle." He frowned. "What do you mean?" I sat down across from him. "Olivia thinks this is about control, power, reputation. She believes she can win by cornering me." I leaned forward. "But she forgets something important. I don't need to corner her. I just need to let the truth breathe." Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of it. The house creaked softly as the night settled around us. Upstairs, I could hear Olivia pacing a controlled rhythm, but heavier than usual. She was thinking, planning, rearranging her next steps. Exactly as I expected. Ethan exhaled. "Dad, what happens tomorrow?" I looked at him. The calm inside me, firm and steady. "Tomorrow," I said, "we stop playing defense. We bring everything into the light." And for the first time since this began, the path forward felt clear. The next morning was quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a long storm. Ethan arrived early at the office, wearing a simple suit, nothing like the sharp, expensive ones Olivia used to pick for him. His steps were steady. His shoulders were straight. There was a calm acceptance in the way he carried himself, as if he finally understood the weight of starting again. I walked in a little later, not as a returning leader, but as someone ready to rebuild. When the elevator doors opened, familiar faces turned toward me. Some smiled softly. Some looked relieved. Others looked unsure. I did not blame them. They had watched a family break in real time. But I also saw something else in their eyes, trust. Quiet trust, the kind that grows only after truth comes to the surface. I did not return as CEO. I made that choice. The company needed someone younger, someone with new energy, but not someone blinded by ambition. And Ethan, he needed space to learn, not from a throne, but from the ground where real understanding begins. I resumed an advisory position. No grand title, no spotlight. Just enough presence to steady the company, guide the culture back to its roots, and protect the people who had stood by me for so many years. Ethan worked in a smaller office down the hall. No assistant, no luxury, no shortcuts. He handled operations reports, troubleshooting issues, learning details he had once skimmed over. He stayed late. He listened more. He wrote questions down, not to impress anyone, but because he wanted to understand. Sometimes I walked past his door and saw him sitting alone reading policies line by line. Other times he came to my office, quiet and humble. "Dad, can you help me understand this part?" "Of course," I'd say. "Sit down," and we would go through it together. These moments were slow, steady steps, tiny pieces of trust being rebuilt. Olivia did not return to the company. Her reputation faded fast after the truth came out. She tried to deny it at first, but the evidence was clear. The investors distanced themselves. Her social circle went silent. Eventually, she left the city to stay with her mother for a while. Ethan did not follow her. He needed distance. He needed clarity. And maybe for the first time, he needed to stand on his own. The company slowly healed. People talked more openly. Departments worked together again. Meetings felt lighter, focused. I stayed in the background, guiding when asked, observing when not. It was a different kind of leadership. Quieter, but more meaningful. One evening, after most employees had gone home, Ethan stood at my office door. He looked tired, but not defeated, just human. "Dad," he said quietly, "thank you for not giving up on me." I closed the file I was reviewing and leaned back. "I never wanted to see you fall," I said. "I only wanted you to see where the path you chose was leading." He nodded, eyes lowered. "I thought power would make me someone." He paused. "But it nearly destroyed me." I shook my head gently. "Ambition isn't the problem," I said. "It's the lack of character behind it. When ambition stands alone, It consumes everything. He absorbed that in silence. I looked at him, my son, not the CEO he tried to be, not the man shaped by someone else's whisper, but the person he was slowly learning to become. We move forward, I said. Not perfectly, not easily, but step by step. He exhaled the weight on his shoulders, easing just a little. As he turned to leave, I added softly, "And Ethan, this time you're not walking alone." He stopped, nodded once, and continued down the hall with a steadier breath. And that is where this story rests. Not in triumph, not in defeat, but in quiet rebuilding. Because in the end, ambition without character destroys everything it touches. And sometimes, the ones who push you down aren't the ones who hate you, but the ones who want your life for themselves. If this story stayed with you, thank you for listening. Please subscribe, share your thoughts, and stay with me for the next chapter.